It's match day in the Carabao Cup as Arsenal embark on their first domestic cup competition of the season, looking, of course, to lift that infamous trophy that has eluded us for so long. This is today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for that episode of what is indeed the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It is greatly appreciated, and I hope you're doing good and well. And I sad to start this kind of show on a bit of a somber note, and I don't want to necessarily include this story in with the others because I do think that it holds much greater importance, because there are far bigger things in this world more important than football, and that is the news, of course, that Chichester City footballer and former Arsenal player Billy Vigar has been placed and induced in a coma after suffering what the club said was a significant brain injury during a match between themselves and Finchley on Saturday. 21 years of age is Billy Vigar, and I just want to say my thoughts and prayers are certainly going to the family and to Billy, of course, as well, and hopefully he comes through this in the best way possible. Awful. Utterly awful. So please be thinking of Billy in your thoughts, and hopefully things will get better for a very talented footballer and a very, very young man indeed. And sadly, at this stage, we don't really have any information about what the outcome will be, and it is too early to have that type of information. Arsenal indeed did release a statement as well. Everyone at Arsenal sends their love and support to Billy and his loved ones at this difficult time, they said, and posted to their X page. So if you weren't aware of this story, I'm glad that I've made you aware of it now, and I hope that you will keep Billy and his family very much in your thoughts. Good morning to those joining us live today. Thank you so much, as always, for doing so. I really appreciate you being here. Tom, good morning to you, to Rob, to Angela, to other Rob as well, to Gary. We've got Jamil, we've got Manny, we've got Claire, we've got Arasilki, Sid, Red Star, Martin Harvey, Amesy, Martin with a Y, Brian, we've got Tiggy, we've got Loga, we've got Steve and Colin. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. I greatly appreciate you all being here. If you could drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and turn those notifications on if indeed you would like to be notified of when we drop our shows. But you know when they are. They're every single day at 8 a.m. Right. Let's now jump into the slides and talk about, of course, today's stories, which kicks off with yesterday's late winner by Charles Sago Jr. for Arsenal in their game against Newport County. A very late goal indeed to give the under-21s a much-needed win, of course. I say much-needed. They've been having a good start to this season, and rightly so. They've got some good players in their squad. If you haven't yet checked out Ifa Ibrahim's pass during the game, please make sure you do. It's one of the best passes I think I've ever seen. And so seeing it in a youth game as well is rather impressive. But massive congratulations to them. And Max Porter, of course, who was taken over most recently as the boss of the under-21s from Mehmet Ali. Carabao Cup action, of course, did kick off last night. Arsenal take themselves to Stoke. I'll be on my way up to Stoke a little bit later on today, and will be very much staying overnight there. I'll be taking, of course, my usual equipment with me, so I'll be doing the podcast from a hotel in Stoke. Actually, I'm staying in Newcastle-under-Lyme, believe it or not. Stoke's kind of this weird place where you get kind of little towns all surrounding each other, and yeah, that's where I'm staying, because hotel situations near Port Vale's ground aren't exactly forthcoming. So I'm actually staying in Newcastle-under-Lyme, it turns out, rather than Stoke. But that's where I'll be, and that's where Arsenal will be tonight, as we will be covering the game, of course, for Football.London and the Mirror. But tonight's games also include Tottenham against Doncaster, Huddersfield against Manchester City, and Newcastle against Bradford. Of course, Arsenal and Newcastle face each other on Sunday. The results of last night's game: Sheffield Wednesday losing at home to Grimsby Town. Grimsby Town, of course, continue after a brilliant run so far, having already knocked out Manchester United. Brentford knocked out Aston Villa on penalties. A really big indictment of Unai Emery right now as the start to this season. Crystal Palace won on penalties against Millwall in a South London derby. Always a frenetic meeting between those two. Millwall recently have played Charlton as well. Both of those ended, I think, with 1-1 scorelines. Swansea beating Nottingham Forest 3-2, as we knew. It's just so embarrassing, isn't it, for Ange Postecoglou, of course. these were the games taking place on Tuesday. Or in the last, what am I talking? Oh no, this is the last. Was my head screwed on? Okay, these are last week's results. What am I talking about? These are last week. I mean, they are still relevant, of course. They did split the weeks into kind of they staggered them for some reason. I don't know why they split them up so greatly, but they did. And Swansea beating Nottingham Forest last week. But those are last week's results, which of course are still in the same round, so still have relevance. Chelsea beating Lincoln City, coming from behind to beat the mighty Lincoln 2-1. Wolves winning 2-0 against Everton. Fulham beating Cambridge United 1-0. Wycombe Wanderers beating Wigan Athletic away from home 2-0. Brighton won 6-0, in which Gomez scored one of the best hat-tricks you will ever see. If you haven't checked it out, make sure you go and do that. Cardiff City beating Burnley in the Premier League, of course, away from home. 2-1 winners there. Wrexham got back to winning ways with a 2-0 win over Reading. And Liverpool, who went down to 10 men after the winning goal scored by Hugo Ekitike, saw him receive a second yellow card after he removed his shirt. I think Arne Slot agreed in the sense that it was a stupid decision that will now see him suspended for their game against Crystal Palace at the weekend. So all the drama and another late goal there beyond the 80th minute for Liverpool as well. So yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? It's Liverpool scoring another goal beyond the 80th minute to win a game. It's mad. It keeps happening. I yesterday was at Mikel Arteta's press conference ahead of the game, of course, tonight against Port Vale. I was surprised that there was actually a press conference before this game, because sometimes they don't do them for games in midweek against kind of the early rounds of the Carabao Cup, but they did, and I was there, and it was a later one. It was like 4:30 in the afternoon, which is a lot later than usual, but I didn't get caught in any kind of rush hour traffic. If anything, it was the easiest traffic I've ever had to go through getting to the ground and back. So if anyway, I was kind of thankful for it. But in terms of injury updates, of course, James Green from Sky was there asking the questions about injuries. And on Noni Madueke, he said, yeah, he's going to be out for a few weeks. We don't really know yet. Probably we're going to have to do a scan next week again. He felt something at the beginning of the match. He tried to carry on. And at halftime, he was too sore. So that is it. Of course, the club, the managing staff wouldn't have been aware of the injury suffered at the beginning of the game, in the knowledge that he could carry on. So, while I guess you could argue that they should have brought him off, but we don't know if they were aware of the issue until he made them aware at halftime that he felt something early on in the game. So it's impossible to speculate on this. And I want to talk about injuries and kind of the controversies and the conspiracies around injuries shortly, because there is a good question from James on it, which I think Arteta answers really well. He says, we hope so, whether it's weeks or months. I said we need to scan him again and the real extent of the injury, but it doesn't look too bad. And how disappointing is it? He said, yeah, he was gutted, obviously, very disappointed to see him because he was in such a good state. He looked a real threat. He was getting some consistency, some flow now in the team, and he looked like a real threat. So it's a big miss for us. Let's unfortunately stick with the injury theme. James said, Nkapie, what's the latest on him? And he said, yeah, he picked up a little groin injury. We have to, again, assess him in the next few days, see how he goes. There's been a change of load, and he didn't really have a pre-season after the injury he had last season with Leverkusen. We'll have to see in the next week or so how he is. But he did say that he thinks it will be a short time that he'll be out. On Kai Havertz, he says, well, with Kai, we know that there will be months for him that he is out. I don't know if he can be weeks. You never know, because this is Kai and he's a different specimen. He's progressing and we really miss him. Hopefully he'll be back and back for the long term as well, which is very important to look at suddenly. So far, he's progressing really well. Now, the important question from James beyond those was this last one, where he says, with all the injuries, we saw it last season, so many that affected the season. We start the year, every single Premier League game, you've picked up a new injury. Is it just bad luck, or is there more to it? Is there anything you as a club, as the medical department, are doing to try and understand why over the last 12 months nearly, you're picking up so many injuries? He says, yeah, well, we looked at obviously everything. The one with Noni, it's bad luck. It's a very unfortunate incident also with Kai. Something similar with Ben White. It was similar with him. With Martin Odegaard, it has been very similar because he's damaged his shoulder twice doing the same action on the floor, which is very unlikely to happen. With Bukayo, it was more of a muscular injury with the hamstring, maybe something to look at more in depth. And we absolutely did that. Try to keep that as low as possible. That's what we're trying to do. And I thought this was a really good answer to kind of the whole conspiracy theorist that you see. The amount of people I saw kind of, falling into the trap, posting videos online, talking about the idea that something's going on at Arsenal. Something's happening, that we're doing this to ourselves. And Arteta rightly points out that Kai's tackle, the tackle that Kai received, causes injury. There was also an incident similarly with Ben White that caused his issue with the re-emergence of his knee problem. We've then had, of course, Ødegaard fall awkwardly onto his shoulder twice. Really unfortunate for him as well. And now, of course, Noni Madueke, an unfortunate twist of his knee. These are not things that we can control. These aren't because they're being overplayed or run into the ground, is kind of the phrase that gets used a lot. As they rightly pointed out, they're impact injuries, they're unfortunate moments, and they are happening ridiculously often, and it is really unlucky that we are having to deal with them. But the idea that anyone would ever not only try and whip up a conspiracy that there's more going on, when you have to think about it logically, just take a step back, put that common sense hat on, and think about the millions that are invested in the coaches, the medical staff, the sports scientists, the strength and conditioning coaches, the doctors, the equipment, the training pitch, the training methods, to the point where if Arsenal can compete and win, they want to do so by having the best of the best in all departments. To think that they would not logically look at that and think of that as an issue, to the point where we'd start questioning it, I'd start questioning the competence of the common sense that's being used around those discussions. I really, really would. Moving forwards, beyond that, and it was quite a quiet presser yesterday. There wasn't too many people in the room. I guess with obviously it being kind of a late one on a Tuesday, that made a bit more sense. There was an opportunity to talk about some of the narrative, if you like, around the Manchester City game. And James asked Mikel, are you surprised where you've got so many ex-players coming out? Does it frustrate you, or is it people not just looking at the approach, you're actually setting the team up in terms of how you want them to play, to play rather than a specific individual player that you want in there? And this obviously relates to the whole kind of cautious approach, the handbrake thing, which he actually brings up himself. Arteta says no, because I don't read it, but my comms officer does tell me that the narrative is around it. If you tell me that this is the main one, if I'm surprised, I would be extremely surprised with my knowledge and my know-how and how I analyze a football game. I would be extremely surprised because it was impossible for somebody to predict the dominance that Arsenal would have throughout the 96 minutes, because it never happened in 17 years of Pep as a manager. This, of course, relates to the statistic that Arsenal had and prevented City from having more percentage possession than Pep has had in 601 matches as a football manager. So if the narrative goes somewhere else and we're talking about the dominance now, about something else, how you can be dominant against such a team, what was the word? Handbrake. Dominance and handbrake, they are two different words, but I accept everything. I will learn more to have a different vision. Now, this wasn't the only question he was asked, obviously, on this idea of having the handbrake on, or the perception of this as well. He was also asked by Phil Duncan from PA as well. He says, I appreciate you obviously don't read or hear it, but when you hear about it, does it frustrate you? Does it annoy you? Because obviously you think about what you're doing, the complete opposite, and in fact, that Man City had to put all their men behind the ball on Sunday. He says, no, I was just surprised, because when I saw everything and watching it all back and with the stats, I was surprised. But I respect everybody's opinion. And if I can see and learn something that I haven't seen, I'm more than happy to do so. So that's never an issue. And as well, I don't think that one player makes that. When you see the behavior of our team, if you want to define that with one player playing one position, I understand. A collective sport in a completely different way, and then we play Ebbs on the right-hand side. Could he play 90 minutes? That's a question I put for myself, because none of you know the load that he can do. So it's easy to say that he could have played with the start. Maybe not, because we already played 2 games from the start, and he's never played as a right attacker in this field. So that's another one, a new element for him, but all good. So let's break this down, because I actually think that, and you saw my thoughts in the last 2 shows that we've done in the response and kind of the fallout from the game against Manchester City. It is my opinion that the reason Arsenal didn't win the game on Sunday was because of the selection, in my opinion. I think that the reason why Arsenal didn't manage to get the goals that they needed to win this game was because we were slightly too, in my opinion, cautious with the selection. That doesn't mean, of course, that we weren't still dominant, or that our style that we played in didn't, of course, pin Manchester City back or create the dominance that we had. I think that you can have 2 things be true at the same time, despite them looking slightly contradictory. And what I mean by that is that We selected an 11, in my opinion, that was slightly too cautious. Well, maybe slightly is even a bit too far. Was just too cautious with the idea of playing Mikel Merino instead of Eze or instead of Nwaneri, etc. and so on. The Trossard selection was a bit surprising for many people as well. The idea that he couldn't do that. And obviously, I think Arteta is right to point out the load on Eze has never played a right side attacking 10 role as we play at the moment. And so throwing him in from the start against Man City in that type of role, you could argue fairly, is that the time to throw him in from the start? But you could then say, well, he could start on the left if you're not comfortable starting him in the 10 role, or rather the right 8 role. But again, he rightly points out that we aren't aware as fans or as journalists in that room of the load. We're not aware of the information that he's receiving from the medical staff. And at the same time, we do have complaints about supposedly players being run into the ground always, and then we start moaning about players being played, while of course being unaware of the load that is being bared on these players and whether or not indeed they are able to play. I think that's also a fair point to bring up. I also think in retrospect, the result of what we got on the day being a draw, when we were all going into that game hoping for a win, the result has overshadowed the way the game played out. And I think the argument that Arteta is putting here is that Arsenal did dominate City. Arsenal did have and create a game whereby that stat is completely accurate. And we know that we'll call out Arteta when he gets his numbers wrong, as he has done in the past. But this is an accurate statistic, which was coming out after the game, that Manchester City, or rather Pep Guardiola, had the lowest possession he has ever had in a game in 17 years. 601 matches of football. Pep Guardiola has never had a side have as low a possession in a game as he had in this game. The fact that Arsenal were able to dominate Manchester City in such a way is definitely not a sign of restraint. It's not a sign of conservatism. Not in the way they approached the game. The way they selected the team, or rather the way Arteta selected the team, in my opinion, was too conservative. But it wasn't in the way they approached the game. And I think maybe that's the difference between the two schools of thought that's going on here. I think maybe Arteta has perhaps misinterpreted that we're talking about how we approach the game rather than we're asking him about the players that were selected to start the game. Because in my opinion, there are a number of occasions where we would have a cutback in the box or we would get into a dangerous position, and we just lacked that kind of third attacking player who would be in the right place at the right time to finish those chances. Mikel Merino wasn't there. Mikel Merino also didn't have a particularly good game, and that's one of the reasons he was brought off at halftime, along with the idea that we needed to be more offensive, and we were already losing at halftime as well, which was another factor to consider with those changes at halftime. I feel as though that what went down regarding the selection, whether it's Eze or not, I think that the argument is in the Ødegaard substitutions from the previous 2 home games. When Ødegaard came off, Nwaneri came on. And if you're replacing Ødegaard in these games with Nwaneri, if Ødegaard is not available and Eze is not fully fit to play, then I think you've got to put the emphasis on Nwaneri playing. Now, others disagree. And I had a chat with James Green at Sky yesterday, and he disagreed. He said he would rather start Mikel Merino over Nwaneri for him. But I would personally disagree, and I would rather have Nwaneri playing instead of Ødegaard if he's not there and if we're not going to start Eze in that particular game. So from that perspective, I get where he's coming from, but I think he's misinterpreted what we're talking about in regards to the handbrake or the conservatism or the cautiousness. I think he thinks we're talking about the way that we've played in that game, which you couldn't argue was done with the handbrake on with conservatism, because we dominated the game. We dominated the ball. City defended extremely well. There are 2 teams playing in this game. You can't just focus on Arsenal. But the reality is that the way that we played could have been, in my opinion, improved, and we could have been more threatening if we had an attacking player in there instead of Marino, not an attacking player, a more attacking player than Marino. I think it's unfair to call him a defensive midfielder. I think it's unfair to say that he's not an attacking player. I think Marino is an attacking player, but I don't think he's as attacking. I don't think we're as brave in our selection as we could have been. And we would have created more clear-cut opportunities if we had that. Because as I pointed out, and this is where, Jason, you're wrong here with your comment about how many clear-cut chances did we create, because the reality was in that game, if you go back and rewatch it, and I recommend that people do, is that there were a number of occasions where we got the ball into dangerous positions, but we lacked the personnel in that third attacking midfield slot to be in the place where they would be so that a big chance would have been created. So the intent was there, the idea was there, the dominance was there, the territory was there, but the personnel was not there. And that's my criticism of the selection, is that if we had the Wineries, or if indeed we had the Ezes, in the second half, as we saw, we would have had that extra player. And when Madueke came off at halftime because of an injury and a not yet fully match fit Saka came on, there was obviously a slight dip. And unfortunately, that was just to do with the timing of that change and that solution. So that, for me, is why that position is so important. Because when you get the balls into those dangerous areas, and as I say, I'd recommend highly that people go and rewatch the game to better understand the game outside of the emotion of what you were watching it when you were watching it. There were so many times where you could see if we had Ødegaard or Eze or Waneri in that first half instead of Marino, I think we would have seen far more high-value chances come from the end of those periods where you got the ball into those dangerous areas in and around the Manchester City box, is how I saw that player. And I also thought the selection of Trossard was also off. I would have started Martinelli in this game, or potentially Eze off the left again. I wouldn't have gone with Trossard. I think he's more of an impact player these days, especially at the point of his career that he's in now. I just don't think that was the right way to do it for me. That's just not where I'm at. So that's kind of the way in which Arteta has done it. But he's well aware of kind of the whole handbrake cautiousness idea. If you saw the video after the press conference, which was now been published and put around social media, you would have seen it as well. So he's very aware of it. I empathise a little bit with his position after, of course, the game that we had against City, because I do think maybe the analysis has been slightly too harsh of the performance. For me, the analysis of the selection is what I personally have more of an issue with. And as I said, I don't think we lose or win the title because of these games. Arsenal, if you look at the two games against Liverpool and City, Arsenal could have very easily won both of those games. It's not a concern for me. It's not the days where we're getting beaten 2-3, 4-5, 0, 5-1, 4-1, whatever. Those aren't the games we're having against these sides anymore. And if you look at the other games that we've played against Leeds and, of course, against Forest, we've been dominant. We've won 0. We've won by lots of goals. These aren't the games that concern me. We'll know a lot more about whether or not we're too cautious, too conservative, too scared in the next 10 games. That's where we will learn about this Arsenal team. We'll learn about what intent is, about what approach is, about what philosophy is in our next 10 games this season. So that's, for me, where it is. And, without a doubt, either of these two games, Arsenal could have won them. On a different day, same performance, same lineups, Arsenal could have won these games. I've no doubt about that. So for me, it's going to be these next 10 games where we look at what Arsenal are really made of. Moving into some of the other points from the press conference, I wanted to ask about Max, because obviously going into the game this week, there's a good, and with Madueke injured as well, I think, Mike, we're going to see more now of Max Dowman. Max Dowman is going to get more opportunities now. So I asked Arteta, because you're in a unique position, I think, as a manager, to manage it and coach a player of such a young age, there is perceptions that players in that age bracket need to be playing regularly to build up that development that they have. When you progress into the senior team at such a young age, and you might not necessarily be on the bench, or indeed you might necessarily be on the bench and not exposed to as many minutes as a player of that age they usually would be, how do you have to cope and find the balance for a player on that level? I think I probably could have worded that question slightly better. The idea, I think I got the idea across, is that a 15-year-old player at a Premier League club is playing pretty much week in, week out for their respective age level. But it's a very unique experience for a player of that age bracket to be in the senior setup already. And of course, he was with the squad for the Man United game, didn't play. He was on the bench against Leeds, came on, won a penalty. He was on the bench at Anfield, came on in the last few minutes. He was on the bench against Forest. Maybe not. He either was or wasn't. I can't remember. He wasn't on the bench in Bilbao. He wasn't on. Was he on the bench in Bilbao? I can't remember. But he didn't play. He didn't play in Bilbao. He definitely didn't play. And he didn't play against City. And obviously, he then played for the under-21s last weekend. So you're in this kind of weird state where you're balancing the minutes that a 15-year-old young player needs to get. But while they're in the senior setup, they're not going to be starting games regularly and they're going to be sitting on the bench. And if they're on the bench, they're not playing for the under-21s. And that's a really odd scenario to have for a player of that age. So Arteta said, well, learning from him, probably, first of all, preparing and having a very good understanding of his new situation and all the things that are different in his life. So we need to change his times, change his education, probably his allocation of where he is with his family. His diet is different. His sleep patterns become different. The training load is different. The amount of information, pressure, exposure is different. So we have to manage a lot of factors into that, a lot of factors that you add a lot of minutes with very different teams. We need to be cautious and very careful. And that's what we are trying to do in the best possible way, to find that balance, to keep Max as connected as possible with the first team, because he's undoubtedly a player that can help the first team. But that's why we need the right mixture of minutes, like he did the other day with the under-21s and with England, to have that exposure when he needs to play for us. He's ready to do that. Also, ironically, he didn't say under-21s, he said under-23s. Still, even the manager makes the mistake about the under-21s now not being the under-23s. It is funny. But I think he answered that question really well, kind of learning about that, the different elements, the factors that we don't even think about as fans, that they have to think about as coaches and as guardians, effectively, also. And so I was going to ask a different question, but based upon how much he gave me on Dowman, I was like, well, I'm going to follow up on this a little bit more. And there's been something, of course, that I think, to get a little glimpse behind the curtain about what it's like for players in some cases that are twice the age of Dowman. How do they react when he does them in training, when he nutmegs them in training, when he does something, of course, that in some ways would embarrass a senior player? And he says at the beginning, they responded immediately, kick him. That was the first one. And Max, to be fair, he was excellent. He stood up and got into the next one. You can really take the impression of someone who was 14 last year at some point when he was doing certain things to players. And now, everybody loves him. You just want to hug him, help him. He's such a nice boy as well. And he's very much liked by everybody here and just looking after us. It brings responsibility to look after somebody with that talent, to make sure that we do what we can, to have to make sure that we're giving him the best chance to exploit his talent. And that's all. And I thought that was some of the best words that we've heard from Arteta on Dowman so far. It's not, giving myself a pat on the back for the question, but just in terms of Arteta's answers around Dowman, we heard some extra stuff also in the embargoed section. You can also go read elsewhere. Is that he's clearly passionate about the talent that Max Dowman has. He's obviously been very forthright in the past about how he's spoken about Dowman, whether it's been unprompted or anywhere else. There is a real kind of appreciation for his talent, but an understanding of the unique situation that he is in and that Arsenal are in and that Arteta is in having to deal with this talent as it is. So exciting times for the future, I think, in regards to that and regards to, of course, what we can expect from him in the future, which is going to be exciting. Right, we're going to go to part 2 now, which is going to be a quick preview right after this. Right, this is part 2 of today's show, where I'm just changing the slide quickly because I've realised I've not actually finished the lineup that I was meant to select for the slides. So we're just adding them in now. But we are going to be looking ahead very briefly and getting your predictions ahead of this game against Port Vale. Here is the team that I have gone for in this game. So, Kepa in goal, Ben White at right back, Christian Mosquera and Gabriel the centre halves because Hincapié is not yet fit. Miles Lewis-Skelly at left back, Norgard at defensive midfield with Declan Rice on the left side of the midfield three for some of that consistency as well. Waneri in the 10, Martinelli on the left, Dowman on the right, and Mikel Merino as Arsenal's centre forward because, we are limited to either Merino or Trossard right now. Giving Eze a bit of a rest, of course, after Arteta talked about the load that he's having to deal with at the moment with a game against Newcastle at the weekend. I would quite like that load to be rested for Eze at the weekend against Newcastle. That's what I've gone for. I think it's a team very capable, of course, of winning this game. It's an exciting team. It gives us the chance to see some new players like Norgard, of course, and Kepa, and also gives the opportunity to some of the younger players like Winery and Dowman. Of course, Martinelli, who's had an excellent week so far also. So really important to consider all the rotation that is needed, a chance to see Norgard in action as well. But that's the team. So now we go to predictions. What are you going for? What do you think the score's going to be tonight? It's a very difficult game to call. These games are always hard. Did I say Tom instead of Ethan? I meant yes, Ethan. But I think it's a very difficult game for us to call. I'm going to go with 3-0 Arsenal victory in this one, but I think some people may be a little bit more cavalier than me. Daniel, speaking of which, says 6-0. Tammy says, no reverse psychology versus Port Vale. Sorry. I mean, you just can't really, can you? Claire says 2-1 to Port Vale. Apparently, you can. James says 8-0 win. Tammy says 4-0 win. Kirill says 4-1 for Port Vale. Callum says 3-0 victory. Mohammed says 3-1. Blackshine says 3-1. Steve says 3-1. 6-0 says 3-0 easy peasy. M. Fawn says 3-0. Sabre says 5-0. Greenweather says 3-1. Brian says 3-1. Soup says 5-0. Lucas says 2-0 in the game. James says, changed my mind. I'm going to go for a 10-0 just for Elliot. Earl says 5-0. Ayung Mon says 1-0 in the game. Efert says 3-0. Daryl says 3-2 to Port Vale. Zeke says 4-0, as does George. Sally's going for a 1-0 victory. And Tiger and Green is going 4-0. I'll continue to throw some of these up while we go to part 4. 4? Where am I going with this? Part 3? We could do 4 if you want. Part 3, your questions and more right after this. Now, some of you are predicting some rather crazy scorelines in the chat today because, you know, you're ambitious. I understand it. You want to see Arsenal win big, but you can win big too. There are ways in which you could be winning big, and that's indeed by not allowing those pesky little peeping toms who might be trying to steal your data while you're using a public Wi-Fi service in order to get their grubby little mitts on them. So you can win big today by giving yourself that extra layer of protection by going to, of course, nordvpn.com/Gooner and getting yourself a significant discount off a 1 or a 2 year plan. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not happy with the service for whatever reason. And, of course, as always, I should tell you that in 2025, having the superpower to change your digital location, get that sentence out one more time, that superpower of a superpower to change your geodigital, I nearly said geopolitical then, that would have been very different. Your geodigital location is an absolute must. So make sure that you get yourself protected with a VPN, and there is none other like Nord. They are the best. Right, let's go into part 2, your part 3, I should say. I can't get my numbers in a row today and your questions. Before I do, though, I do want to say it's, and this, yeah, without going slightly political here, it's bloody good to see Jimmy Kimmel back on the screens. I am someone, and I've tweeted this out this morning as well, you cannot underestimate the freedom of press. As a journalist myself, and coming from zero political angle at all, it is important that everyone has the right to say as they want. Freedom of speech, we've talked about on the channel so many times. It doesn't mean you're not freedom from the scrutiny about what you say, but freedom of speech, freedom of the press is so important. So important. So I am very glad to see the reversal of that decision, even from here in the UK. So glad, because there is a real worry and a danger about the censorships going on from all sides, from left to right. Censorship has been an issue. It needs to change. We need to instill this freedom of speech element back amongst society. It's so important that we have the right to be able to say what we want. But of course, understand that there are consequences, particularly for some things that you can say as well, and the scrutiny of things that you might say, which we also very much talk about here as well. God forbid a comedian make a joke. Right, George. Anyway, let's bring it back to football, but I didn't want to leave without mentioning that because, as I say, as a journalist, the freedom of press is very, very important to me indeed. Let's go to, let's scroll in the chat and get some questions of the game. Lucas says, how is Ødegaard? Well, actually, I should point out there was a question on Ødegaard as well in the press conference from Simon. He said, no surgery. He's totally fine. He's already been training and it will be a matter of days. So we could see Ødegaard back maybe tonight if we're lucky, but ultimately could be back for the game at the weekend against Newcastle, which is really important. JP says, why does Arteta not get credit for milestones, i.e. amazing top 6 record versus Pep, for instance? Now it's how we do it as opposed to doing it. It's like us not appreciating Saka because he's always good. It's a really interesting point, JP. It's a really, really, really interesting point because Pep, for instance, was utterly and entirely praised for how he managed to get a point at Arsenal and nearly get 3 points. All of the talk after the game from pundits and from media, certain aspects of the media, certain pundits, was on praise for Pep. Praise for a 5 out of 6 Premier League title-winning manager with untold resources and an untold wealth of talent available to him in setting up with the lowest amount of possession, which obviously I think was impinged much so by Arsenal, of course, as well, despite the fact that if you rewind to the start of last season, when Arsenal went down to 10 men for 54 minutes of the game and nearly managed to secure a victory, and if it wasn't for a very last minute, even more so last minute goal than it was obviously in this game, it is just night and day about it. And I guess the differences between the two is obviously Pep has won the titles, whereas Arteta has yet to win those titles. And that's the difference between the two. But for me, that's not a good enough reason to not talk about the difference in perception between the two teams. Not at all. It doesn't forgive, it doesn't absolve the way that teams are talked about differently. It just doesn't. It does not change the context for me. Pep Guardiola has already lost 2 games during this Premier League campaign against Spurs and against Brighton. And after, of course, still spending big still themselves and summer, having spent far, far more over the course of that project than what we have seen from other perspectives, you cannot excuse it if you are going to talk about Arteta in a different way. Be consistent, be aligned, be linear in how you do it, because if you don't, you end up looking rather silly. Jack says Pep has the advantage of having actually been successful before, so the media, of course, is easier on him. It's all of that type of context. And James also says, until you win titles, you don't dictate the narrative. Simple as that. Not right, but it is how it is. Well, I'm glad you said that it's not right, because that's really important. D says the narrative is being very carefully constructed against Arteta. The propaganda is out there. Some facts that work against Arteta are also out there. I think he has this season, and the pressure is now, I mean, the pressure's been on for a long time. I think we can agree, D. The pressure has been on him for a long, long, long time. The scrutiny around the start of this season, to me, has been nuts. I genuinely find it baffling how some people have talked about Arsenal this season. They've scored so far, 10 goals at home, is it? 9 goals at home? 9 goals at home in the 3 games that they've played. Obviously, they've gone and won their first Champions League game as well, away in a very difficult place to go in Bilbao, of course. And they could have very easily, as I say, won either of the other 2 games that they didn't win at the start of the season. The United game, I think, is a bit of an anomalous one, even though we won that game, ironically. I feel like it's not being talked about as such. And ultimately, I think Arsenal, again, it's like we're kind of that just last little click away from, for me anyway, seeing this team steamroll anyone, not just obviously the teams that we expect to beat handily, but also the likes of Liverpool and City. And having the start the season that I was concerned. No, I see it as an opportunity, without a doubt, the start of the season that we've got. And it has been an opportunity. And I think that the narrative around Arsenal and how Arsenal have started this season, and how many points we've got from the games that we've got, has been analysed so incorrectly. So incorrectly. It doesn't take into account anything. It's baseless. It's contextless. It's contextless. It really has been, I think, for some, really kind of revealing about narratives, agendas, and so on and so forth. How Arsenal have started this season with the wins that they've had against United and Leeds and Forest and the goals that they've scored in those games while, of course, we have seen the integration of players in a very difficult opening run of fixtures, despite the fact that if they go to Newcastle and win, which we expect and will be disappointed if they don't, will be 2 net points up on what they were in the previous season. It's just, for me, it's mad, some of the scrutiny and the discussions around this Arsenal team. It really is mad to me. Sally says, after finishing second 3 times in a row, it means that there are no throwaway matches. It doesn't matter if it's match week 1 or 38. And Solly, that's why Arsenal haven't thrown away any of the matches they've played. That's why they've gone to win every single game that they've played. You can't say that Arsenal weren't trying to win at Anfield. You can't say Arsenal weren't trying to win against City. They were. That's why they were the most important team in that first half at Anfield. They weren't proactive enough in their change in the second half. And that's why, without a doubt, they tried to win against City. There's no doubt they did. The Arteta didn't want to draw from either of those 2 games. Yes, he didn't want to lose. And that's also an important point to add. But it's not to say that they didn't want to win. Because you don't want to lose a game doesn't mean that you also don't want to win. That's not how that phrasing works. It's not binary. And people continue to fall into these kind of binary trap holes on a rather worryingly consistent basis as well. Lloyd says the funny part is that this narrative is being pushed by former players who we thought understood the game better than us. I know there is definitely an irony to that. Jack says, do you actually think Arteta has learned from the City game? I think he starts Mourinho in the 10 against Newcastle. Potentially. I mean, I think the fact of the matter is, if Odegaard was fit, do you think Mourinho starts any of the games that Mourinho has started? That's the question I think you need to ask. Does anyone seriously think at Anfield or against City or at Newcastle, if Odegaard is fully fit, Mourinho starts? Does anybody seriously think that if Odegaard was fully fit, Mourinho still starts? The answer is obviously no. So it's not a case of Mourinho is being picked tactically for those games, and he would have picked Mourinho anyway. He's picking Mourinho because he feels he is the next best option for those particular games if Odegaard is not there. Now, I think that he's wrong, and I think as a result, we saw a lack of danger and threat in the final third. But the idea isn't necessarily wrong, and it's not certainly done so as a, we wouldn't be talking about Arsenal being too cautious if they started Odegaard in any of those games, would we? We wouldn't be saying that. We would be if he would have picked Mourinho over Odegaard for any of those games. That's when you could have a genuine conversation about Arteta being way too cautious, way too handbrake on. But we all know if Odegaard was fit, he starts all those games. So what, for me and for you, does that really tell us? Because I think that's the critical question. I think that's the question that unveils everything, really, for me, about the narrative of the whole selections and cautiousness and, all of this. That, for me, is the biggest thing. It's without a doubt the biggest thing. I'm just going to plug this laptop in, because otherwise, if I don't plug this laptop in, it's going to die. And no one would want that. Some people would want that. All right, there we go. Please charge. Thank you. Yeah. Jason says he does not trust Ethan and Eze, and that is damning. Jason, I mean this with all the love and respect in the world, but I don't understand how after Odegaard got injured against Leeds and against Nottingham Forest, he doesn't bring on somebody else like a Rice and move Mourinho when he was starting, or bring on Mourinho against Leeds. He brings on Ethan. And then obviously he starts Eze in Bilbao. He starts Eze against Forest. He brings Eze on at half-time against Man City. This idea that he doesn't trust them is, cover your children's ears, bullshit. That's just so incorrect based upon the evidence that we have seen in these games. Like, you're just so wrong about that. And the thing is that I read that comment out because I know Jason's not the only one who thinks it. No player gets signed without being trusted. No player gets their contract renewed without being trusted. And no player comes on for your captain if they're not trusted. he's not selecting those players in this game not because he doesn't trust them, it's because he thinks that Mikel Merino is the right choice. It's not to do with Eze or Ethan. And it might be to do more so with Eze with this load argument that he talks about, which we have to take at face value. But this idea that he doesn't trust them is rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Because if he didn't trust them, I mean, if we have a quick look at the bench against Leeds, right? So Arsenal Leeds, 5-0 game. Arsenal are 1-0 up, I think we established at the point where Odegaard got injured. He has Trossard, he has Nwaneri, he has Dowman, he has Martinelli, he has Merino on the bench. Odegaard gets injured. Who comes on? Nwaneri. And if we look at the Forest game as well, to have a look at the players that are available to him in the Forest fixture, which was 3-0. There we go. Subs in that game, Odegaard gets injured. He's got Martinelli, he's got Trossard, he's got Nwaneri, he's got Rice, he's got Dowman. Who does he bring on? Does he bring on Rice and move Merino into that number 10/right 8 role? No. Does he bring on Trossard, who he's used there in the past? Does he move Eze into the 10 and Martinelli on the left? No, he brings on Nwaneri. So I'm sorry, but this idea that he doesn't trust them is bollocks. Absolute bollocks. So with all the love and respect in the world, that's just not, it's just not correct, is it? Iama says, I've seen a few people in this chat say the criticism bias because Arteta hasn't won anything. Anyone want to bet the moment that we win something, the pressure expectations go 10 times higher? Almost certainly. Vacan says, would you be willing to do a piece on why there is an inherent bias in the media against Arsenal? I mean, what would you want me to do, Vacan? Like, how would that even go about? Because the reality is that while I think that Arsenal are talked about differently and are scrutinised more, the reality is that there are other clubs who are also scrutinised a hell of a lot. Manchester United, for example, are scrutinised ridiculously. Now, they are pretty bad, but they were scrutinised even when they were finishing second under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and under Jose Mourinho. So there are arguments that other teams are also scrutinised. But I think there's more an argument that it's not about Arsenal being overly scrutinised. I think it's actually about how other teams are let off more scot-free. But no, I'm not really. It's not really in my purview, to be honest, to want to engage too much along that or even bring more attention to it. I'd rather focus on Arsenal, to be fair. So this is the games Eze was started on the wing. Eze and Nwaneri are much more similar to Odegaard than Merino is. I get that, and I agree with you, but that's not in always what. It's not a case of just one in, one out. It's not a case of like a certain games, for instance, the Liverpool game, the City game. If you don't have Odegaard, Eze hasn't necessarily got the pressing that Odegaard has, and doesn't necessarily have the defensive attributes that Odegaard has. And so therefore, against Liverpool and against City, he wanted a player that did have more of those elements in that position. I disagree. I think he should have gone with a Nwaneri or an Eze in those games. I think we could have been a more front foot. And I think that's because we have Rice and we have Zubimendi. I think we've got a good enough midfield foundation that we don't need to replace Odegaard with a player with more defensive strengths and qualities. Even though Merino is not a defensive player, he has more defensive attributes than the likes of Nwaneri and the likes of Eze. The same with Odegaard has more defensive attributes than Nwaneri and Eze. So that's why he did it. And I get why he did it. It's not to do with trust. It's to do with how he thinks that that game should be approached. And also respecting the opponent a little bit too much. I think he respected Liverpool and City a bit too much in that selection. That's how I feel about it. Sabro says Miguel Delaney just wrote that article. Okay, I'll have to give Miggy's piece a read. Patrick says when Odegaard was out for a run of games last year, he played Trossard as number 10 and not Ethan, despite Trossard being an awful. Well, I mean, Ethan was also exceptionally young, and he also played Ethan when Saka was out. Did he not, Patrick? Did he not play? I'm pretty sure when Saka was out, he played Ethan on the right-hand side. So let's not pretend like when our most important, most talismanic figure is out, that after Nwaneri's been gradually bedded in after a few months in the league that season for his first major campaign in the squad, that he's then been playing him on the right, technically out of position for what we consider him to be a more central player as well. So I don't think that analogy lands. Paul says, when we say he doesn't trust them, look at the wider context. In the big games, why has he always started the same midfield when Odegaard is not available? I think he's more concerned about the press. In terms of what press? Me or the pressing the opposition? It's a style thing. It's not to do with a lack of trust in those players. It's a style. It's an attributes-focused approach, and it's the idea that he feels that Arsenal are better combative to play against City and Liverpool with Mourinho in there than he does with Nwaneri or Eze. Air Rosen says, is that respect or fear? It's both, is the answer. It's a bit of both. I think it's too fearful. I think it's too respectful. It's both. 100% it's both. Jack says, he trusts to play Ethan on the wing, but something he doesn't like about Ethan in Ødegaard's... It's not true. It's not a case of he doesn't like about Ethan in Ødegaard's role, because if that was true, why did he bring him on for Ødegaard against Leeds and against Forest? Think about it. He wouldn't have brought him on for Ødegaard. He would have brought on Rice or Mourinho in the respective games they were on the bench in Leeds and Forest, or he would have brought on Trossard or Martinelli and moved other players around. He didn't. He brought on Nwaneri. So stop with this whole rubbish conspiracy that he doesn't trust the guy. So if he didn't trust the guy, he wouldn't have renewed him to a new deal, and he wouldn't have played him instead of Ødegaard when he got injured. So think about it. Just take a step back. Don't give into your conspiracy mindset and just think about it a little bit. Then says, Tom, you are missing the point that in the biggest games, you didn't bring him in as a direct replacement. Yes, because of the opponent, Jason. Because of the opponent. But if Ødegaard was fit, who is a much more attacking player than Mourinho is, he wouldn't have started Mourinho. So, no, I'm not missing the point. You're missing the point. Because the point is, if Ødegaard was fit, he starts against both Liverpool and City and Bilbao. In Bilbao. You're missing the point. Don't be so stubborn as to not look at the evidence in front of us that shows us that when Ødegaard's fit, he plays those games. And I asked that question, and you all agreed that when Ødegaard's fit, he'd start those games. If he didn't trust Nwaneri, if he didn't trust that style of player, if he didn't want to be more attacking, you would have all agreed that Mourinho would start against City and Liverpool if Ødegaard was fit. But Ødegaard wasn't fit, and so he started Mourinho. It's just night and day. Night and day. I'm sorry, but you're just so off base on this. Everyone says, Tom, why hasn't anyone asked him about Gyökeres after winning the Gerd Müller trophy and his comments that needs chances to be a goal scorer and he didn't get as he had 0 shots on target against Liverpool and City? He was asked about Gyökeres after the game. I'd recommend going and watching the presser after the City game. Lynn says, Tom, had Arteta brought on Ethan and we lost 3-0, the fans would be asking why they didn't bring Mourinho on. There is no winning with some of our fans. I absolutely, without a doubt, yeah. If he had brought on and we lost 3-0, I don't think that would have happened. I don't think that would have happened because I think that Rice and Zubimendi are good enough that we wouldn't have lost that game 3-0 with Nwaneri there. And I think he was too cautious in picking Mourinho for those 2 games. I get why he did, and it's not because of anything to do with Nwaneri and trusting him or not trusting Eze. It could be to do with the load of Eze, but it's to do with the qualities that Mourinho has. It's to do with what we have when Mourinho's not there in Ødegaard, and it's to do with the opponent that we're facing. It's as simple as that. Because against Leeds and against Forest, it wasn't Mourinho or Rice that was coming on for an injured Ødegaard. It was Nwaneri. But against those teams, he's gone with Mourinho instead to be more combative, to win the midfield battle, to win the dominance, which we did in both games, particularly in the first half at Anfield. And as a result, Arsenal could have won both games. Easily could have been on the winning end of either of those 2 games. There is no argument that Arsenal weren't going to win either fixture because they very much could have won either game. So it really is as simple as that. Sabra says, Cap, no one would have asked why he didn't bring Mourinho on. What? I don't know what you're talking about, mate. No, that's never been the point here. The point has been about the fact that when Ødegaard is fit, he's picked. When he's not fit for games against City and Liverpool, Mourinho plays. When he's not fit and comes off against Leeds and Forest, Nwaneri plays. It's really as simple as that. I cannot spell it out any simpler than that. And I'm recognizing now I'm going up to the hour, so I'm going to have to shoot. But you try. You say things a million ways. If it doesn't come across, I think you should probably understand it's never gonna. But I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for tuning in, as always. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. We'll probably do a phone-in show next week at some point. It's tricky with so many games that are on. I don't think we've actually got a midweek off until the middle of November now. We've got midweek games all the way until that point. So it's going to be tricky, but we'll see. Enjoy yourselves. It's always enjoy the hustle. Enjoy the debates, as always. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.